Hello, welcome to Queering Arthur, a podcast where you can join us in exploring queer interpretations of Arthurian legend. I'm Kelly Oakler.
And I'm Dr. Schuyler Rad.
Today we're talking about the life of Saint Illtud. Illtud?
Just say Illtud.
Illtud. The life of Saint Illtud and the life of Saint Padarn from the 11th and 12th centuries.
This episode contains references to a robot uprising, war, violence, ableist exclusion, 20th century white male privilege, narcissistic consumption under capitalism, philosophy of sin and Catholicism, internalized homophobia, phagiophobia, binary gender as a mythological trope, and eating disorders as a metaphor. If any of that is something you don't want to listen to, then take care of yourself and skip this episode.
This is part 4 in a series on... This is part 4 in a series on the Arthurian Hagiographies. If you've been tuning in, you know this is part of the episode... Wow. If you've been tuning in, you know this is the part of the episode where we normally get a view of the high-level cultural context using our metaphorical hermeneutic satellite. But since we've covered the cultural context of this period in episodes 1 through 4, and since these texts are about saints, we've prepared a members-only episode that still uses the hermeneutic satellite, but specifically looks at the high-level spiritual and religious context. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can find us on Patreon and become a knight of our virtual roundtable.
Let's zoom in on the author.
Are we almost done with these unknown authors?
Almost.
Why are all these authors unknown? Are they just lost to time?
It's more about the culture of the time.
Oh, the manuscript culture.
Right.
They just didn't record author names because it was more of a group effort.
Or an all glory to God sort of ideology.
But these manuscripts spread around.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a scene repeated through some of Ken Follett's novels. Like in The Evening and the Morning, where Monk Aldred is excited to trade manuscripts with a monk from another area.
Oh, so part of the culture was gift giving. Giving gifts that were handcrafted.
Yeah, handcrafted. I'm just thinking this medieval monk making manuscripts. It's usually this super serious, dark and dreary tone. But these books or manuscripts, they were handcrafted. So I was just imagining these queer monks sitting around sipping on strawberry mead and drawing cute animals in the margins and sprinkling the letters with gold dust and sewing the pages together.
Oh yeah, manuscript culture was a big crafting party.
Yeah, let's go make some books.
And they were crafted very well. Some were so amazing that they stood the test of time.
Right. These two hagiographies we're looking at today, like the last one, comes to us from the Cotton collection.
Is it also organized by a dead Roman emperor's name?
Yeah. Actually, it's part of the same bound volume, Cotton Vespasian A14.
The Vespasian bookcase, shelf... Oh gosh, did I tell you about IMS?
No, what's that?
So... It's a way of helping to organize in the library, and it stands for Intelligent Material Management System.
Sounds like Skynet.
A little. It basically is, as you check in books, you would have scanned a cart. So when you check in the book, it knows that went onto that cart, and then it knows that those books now are going to this shelf. So it's a way to keep track of things so they can't get as lost, in theory. But we all know that things just walk out of the library sometimes, so we'll see.
I really like that, though, this system of tracking where books are, because unlike having this top-down organization system of these books fit in this category, like we were talking about with the Name of the Wind book, how every librarian has a different way to organize books.
Oh, yeah.
If you're tracking the data of where things are, you sort of have this bottom-up system. You can use machine learning to find those patterns in where the books and the other materials in the library's catalog are going and where they are, and that kind of tells you the natural and organic ways these books are being used. So it's a bottom-up system that can tell you how to organize books rather than this top-down dead Roman emperor's names.
True. I mean, we currently have ways we run lists all the time of, there's some called Dead on Arrival, where there are books that were sent to the branch that no one ever checked out, but they're still like sort of new. It's just that nobody at that branch ever took it out. So you'll take those and send them away to another branch to see if maybe they can live a life. And different things like that. So we run lists all the time. But yeah, this is very, very wild. It's just in some ways more work and in some ways less work. Because you can't just move a thing onto another cart. Because then you won't know that it was moved onto that cart. There's no way to know unless you were the one that did it.
So you're moving it from carts to shelves, but you also have to track that data to give it to the system.
Yes.
So it's doubling your job.
Kind of. Yes and no. Doubling and also relieving some things.
What is relieving?
We won't run our like holds lists the same way. We'll have a little like smartphone to do everything on, and we'll just grab it and scan it, and then it will tell us where it goes.
Oh, and we know all of the patrons that go to the library have smartphones and know how to use them, right?
Yep. And also, no one ever goes around and pulls books off shelves and just leaves them places or puts them back on shelves in the wrong place. No one would ever do that.
I've certainly never done that.
Mm-hmm. We have a patron that every time they come in, I'm like, comic book section's going to be a disaster. Mm-hmm. They always pull out stuff, presumably to look at, and then they'd either leave it on the shelf next to where it goes, which is fine, because then I know just put it back, or I have to go find them wherever they are. Good times. Never a dull moment at the library, and that's what I know.
It's a living library.
Anyways.
Yeah, this hagiography.
Yeah, it came to Cotton in his collection some decades after Henry VIII.
Yeah, and the dissolution of the monasteries.
But where did it come from before then?
Well, I had a bit of luck since recording the last episode where we talked about the Vespasian A14 bound volume.
Oh, yeah?
Well, maybe not luck, more like this thing was right in front of me the whole time, but I didn't notice it until it was too late. But now I'm making up for it.
Oh, yeah, I've done that before.
Thank you for your sympathy.
So what was it that you had overlooked?
Well, I have some information from searching around for Vespasian AXIV, like through the British Library and Mary Jones and Codex, which it's a really fun acronym. It means Collaborative Online Database and E-Resources for Celtic Studies. Codex.
Ooh.
But it was in the very title of that webpage. I hadn't been looking at closely enough. I was scrolling too fast. It had another name for that volume. Vitae Sanctorum Wallensium.
Which is...
Oh, the lives of the Welsh saints, or the lives of the Celtic saints.
Which is it?
Kathleen Hughes calls it Lives of the Celtic Saints, but Wallensium means Welsh, like in Wallensium Princeps, Prince of the Welsh, or the Prince of Wales.
Okay. And so where did that come from?
It's a compilation. It has first a 12-page calendar, then a 6-page primer on Old Cornish vocabulary, a 2-page treatise on the situation in what is today called Brecon in South Wales, 50 miles south from Clancarvan, like we were talking about on the southern coast. Then there's a page intentionally left blank, an index, 4 hagiographies over 84 pages, including for Caddock and Illtud, a 4-page treatise on the founding of the church in Llandav, 2 more hagiographies over 14 pages, another page intentionally left blank, 9 more hagiographies over 66 pages, including for Saints Padarn and Carrantock, and finally a 2-page narrative about the voyages of St. Brendan, Abbot of Clonfert, from County Galway, Ireland, who was also called Brendan the Navigator.
That really brings the book to life. 210 pages of history. No, 210-page historical artifact.
Yeah, there really is something fascinating about old books.
So how did all of these old texts end up in one compilation? And is there any evidence for that?
Well, okay, let me write you an essay.
Right. Justify and explain your answer. You have 5 minutes. Go.
Scholar Kathleen Hughes, who I mentioned earlier, in their chapter in the 1958 book, which was cited in that webpage I had scrolled past I was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. In their chapter in the 1958 book, Studies in the Early British Church, the most comprehensive approach to it claims that it originated from the Monmouth monks.
Monmouth, as in Geoffrey of Monmouth?
It's the same place, yeah, but this is about Monmouth Priory, which was a Benedictine order of monks.
But what's the evidence of this connection to Monmouth?
Hughes points to the inclusion of the dates of death for Hathelfus de Ara and Cuthman of Steining in the calendar at the beginning of the bound volume, as well as the inclusion of the hagiography for Saint Dochelinus, a rare saint linked to Saint Florent de Saumur.
So these people were all tied to Monmouth.
Right. Hathelfus may have been a benefactor or had some other noteworthy association with Monmouth properties. Cuthman was a monk in the Benedictine priory of St. Peter of Selle in Wessex, and both of these places were dependent houses of the major Benedictine monastery in France, the Abbey of St. Florent de Saumur, where St. Dochelinus was from.
Oh, and that abbey is on the river, the Loire River? I don't know, it's French. But yeah, looking at the map brings it together. That river is connected to the Atlantic Ocean, and Llandav is on the southern coast of Wales. And the capital of Brittany, Reims, is right in the middle, itself on the Ill and Vilaine rivers connected to the Atlantic. Right next to Normandy, too. So this all points to a network of Benedictine monasteries sharing these texts. Okay, got it. It's all coming together.
The poison for Cusco.
Cusco's poison.
This network, it expanded in 1093 and 1104 when Clancarvan was granted to Gloucester.
1093, that's when Liverick was last Archdeacon of Llandaff.
1094, but there wasn't an exact date I could find, so maybe it was just within a few weeks.
And 1104 was when Urban was appointed bishop.
Right. It really was a turbulent time. I mean, Welsh history is marked by a lot of turbulence, but here we have very specific records.
Yeah, fascinating. And this connection to Gloucester must explain the inclusion of the other hagiographies that aren't as readily connected to Monmouth.
Yep. Saints Elwyn and Kenneder are tied to Gloucester.
I don't know if Hughes is right, but it does seem to be more than a coincidence or even just convenience. Like, we were talking about these images of manuscript culture before. That image of a dark and dreary seriousness as opposed to the image of monks having a crafting party. And now with this network, it makes me think more of a collaboration and gift giving we talked about.
How so?
These monasteries and abbeys, by sharing texts, weren't just preserving knowledge, they were actively participating in a community of learning.
Yeah, and mutual respect, too.
Right, and it's a testament to the humanness of these medieval folks, their interconnectedness and interdependence. It's not just this standalone text. I mean, I get to thinking that way too, like episode by episode, we look at separate things. But this series on Arthurian Hagiographies has really started to connect things.
And while these people of faith were making these connections, people of war were making conquest.
Right? One group is transcending geographical boundaries through technology, while another group is reinforcing boundaries through technology.
That's part of the hermeneutic.
For sure. We've got these connections, the intertextuality. I mean, people themselves are putting different pieces together. A calendar here, hagiographies there, vocabulary too. It makes for a sort of meta-interpretation.
Whoa, now.
No. The interpretation is the monks putting all of these things together, and now here we are interpreting what they put together.
Meta-interpretation. Fascinating.
You're goddamn right.
Zooming in on the text, plenty has been said of the saints. I recommend mythbank.com or just Wikipedia or Google search to learn more about the saints themselves and form interpretations of the content of the texts. But for our part, we form interpretations of the text in the last section of the podcast, where we use a queer lens to interpret the text. So instead of rehashing what's already been said, I want us to take some time to look at the text as an artifact in itself.
Oh, okay, me first. Books as artifacts. Okay, so I know we talked about Vespasian A14, but that volume has page citations that are kind of weird. The Illtud hagiography is on page 43V through 52R, while Caddock is on 17R through 43V. Padarn is on 80V through 84V. And Carantoc is on 93R to 94V. These aren't pages, really. They're called folios. And a folio is a rectangular piece of paper folded in half so that...
Hot dog style or hamburger style?
Hamburger style.
Hamburger.
Okay, folded in half. So on each side, there were two pages called verso on the left and recto on the right.
Oh, okay. So that's the V and R. 43V means it's on the 43rd piece of paper on the left page.
Well, 43V would be the 21st piece of paper on the second side on the left page, because each folio has two sides.
Oh, right.
And then 8 folios were sewn together in a quire, today called a signature.
One quire is 32 pages then.
One quire is 8 folios. Each folio has 2 sides, and each side has 2 pages. So, yeah, one quire is 32 pages.
Oh, okay. Cool.
I know!
My turn now.
What do you got?
I just wanted to share a bit about how, as an artifact, these texts are cited and used as evidence of historical theories.
Well, yeah, that's sort of what we're doing, right?
In a way.
Or like the chapter by Dr. Hughes we talked about earlier.
Right, using the text and the intertextuality to support a theory or hypothesis. But this one just has a small bit related to the text for today, but it also has a small interesting bit about epigraphy.
Epigraphy?
Inscriptions on epitaphs. And it touches on something we discussed in the last episode.
What's that?
It's the stone altar.
Oh, of a color no one could discern.
Right. Apparently, these magic stone altars were common in hagiographies. One shows up in the hagiography of St. Patrick, and one in the hagiography of St. Illtud, which was one of the ones we're reading for today.
Oh, I didn't see that.
It's in a different section of the hagiography. The White Anthology only has that part that references Arthur.
Oh.
And in that text, the author is comparing the stone altar to the Cheshire Cat.
What?
Yeah, he says, these stone altars of the Celtic saints would float not only in water, but in air, like the unsupported head of the Cheshire Cat.
When was this written?
It's the July to October 1920 issue of the journal Archaeologia Cambrensis.
Easy for you to say. So since Alice in Wonderland was published in 1865, the author makes a pop culture reference to something that came out 55 years earlier. That's like someone in 2024 referencing something in 1969.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like Woodstock or the moon landing.
Right.
So the main idea I want to get across is that people use these hagiographies to support all sorts of theories.
What theory?
What?
You didn't talk about a theory.
Oh, right. That's what I was talking about. The epigraph.
Right.
Well, it's a tangent, I guess, but it might be a good example of hermeneutics.
But this was from 1920, so like a proto-hermeneutic.
Sure. The fusion of horizons idea didn't come around until the 60s.
Anyways, go on.
Right. So it's an article about the historical and linguistic significance of inscriptions related to leprosy in Wales. The author, Egerton Phillimore, argues...
That's a great name.
What?
Egerton Phillimore. Just an outstanding name for a 20th century British archaeologist.
You can't make this stuff up.
Anyways.
So Phillimore argues that the Trausfynydd stone, with its inscription originally being read as Homo planus, or plain man, upon closer inspection of the stone itself, and accounting for contemporary use of language, could be better understood to be read Homo pianus.
Piano Man?
No.
Sing me a song of Piano Man.
Sing us a song
tonight.
It's sad and it's sweet tonight.
I don't know the words right now.
When I was a... No, Homo pianus. And this is...
Gay piano.
What? Oh, no. It's pianus. Homo pianus. Pianus was a contemporary term for Christian because the P letter makes an R sound in Greek. And with an X before the word pianus, which was ignored by some people when they were writing Greek letters, it's actually the Greek letter chi.
Oh, so pianist with a chi on the front and the P sounding like an R. Kyrianus.
Right. Kyrianus. Like Christian.
And so it's this proto-hermeneutic because it accounts for the contemporary use of language.
Right. And just one more bit. Although interesting, this 1920 article really pissed me off.
What?
In the article, there's an asterisk next to the author's name.
Okay. What does it say?
Okay, I'll read it. In this compilation, I have to acknowledge very considerable assistance received from my friend, the editor of Archaeologia Cambrensis, who has contributed a wealth of materials from and references to a large number of works and articles which I do not possess, and to other works which I own, but had not adequately gone through. These materials mostly reached me after my article, drafted over a year ago, had been copied out for press, and I have pigeonholed them into its framework as best I could in the time allotted me. Hence, I'm afraid the order and arrangement of the items in this article leave much to be desired. Time and strength, however, were both lacking for me to recast the whole in a more articulated form. Egerton Phillimore, Christmas, 1920.
I know why this made you angry already, but I will ask the question. Why does that make you angry? I have a suspicion, but...
The guy literally just admits to not adequately going through his sources, pigeonholing them into an existing article, having a poor arrangement and order, and just says, time and strength were lacking for me to recast the whole in a more articulated form. I mean, how easy was it to be a scholar 100 years ago? Inadequate, pigeonholed, unordered? Just say you didn't have enough time or strength and you can get published.
Yeah, academic publications.
Yeah.
Oh, to be a white man 100 years ago.
Now, let's get to the queer stuff by not just zooming in on the text, but looking at the text with a queer lens. On page 18, it says that Illtud was given gifts according to his warlike taste.
Warlike taste. Isn't that really macho, though? How is it queer?
You're right. That's an average interpretation, I think, probably. But focusing on the taste part sort of counters the warlike part, the macho-ness.
So having an aesthetic taste is what struck you as queer.
In and of itself, taste doesn't need to be queer, but taking account of all these factors of beauty or aesthetics, that's the field of philosophy that beauty is in. It just... What I'm trying to say is that it all starts to show that there isn't really any variability between queers and heteronormative or cisnormative folks. It's the factors.
Beauty is beauty, but it is variable, though. Like, a Ferrari could be beautiful to some because it's crafted well and has lots of power, but some may find it disgusting because it represents consumption, decadence, and narcissism.
Right. Taste is variable, but the things that cause taste are not variable. Those are the factors, the causes. And the text itself doesn't really account for variability. It just says there is a warlike taste. But yeah, you're right. Taste does vary from person to person.
So it's like this dual nature of taste.
Right. The things that cause taste are fixed.
So the manifestations of taste are what's variable.
So it's that dual nature of a thing, the multiplicity that makes it queer. Being fixed and variable simultaneously depending on your perspective.
Okay, multiplicity. But that applies to everything, right? Everything has fixed factors, but variable manifestations. Everything has one interpretation in one place and time, but other interpretations at different places and times.
Right, but this is where the hermeneutic comes in, the fusion of horizons. With my background, I have to reconcile my ideas of taste to what the author was trying to say.
And the author wrote in Latin, so here we go on another Latin lesson.
Not just Latin, but Catholicism too.
What?
But no, you're right. It's about the Latin translation. I have a bone to pick.
And what's that?
Well, it's that word we've been talking about, taste.
So you have a different taste in translation?
Haha, bisexual finger guns.
Yeah.
I'm more of a non-binary peace sign kind of person. But anyways, so the original Latin uses the word desiderium.
Desiderium, like that which is desired?
Right.
Okay, so choosing the word taste as the translation is lacking because it's more about desire.
And not just that, but the desire for what is sinful.
How so?
Well, looking this up, the citation led me to Thomas Aquinas, who was and still is this towering figure in Christian philosophy because of his book Summa Theologica. It described these different types of sin. Sin here being the Catholic conception of moral evil, where evil is defined as privation or lacking of form or order or due measure. And moral is right reason and eternal law. And it is an action performed by an intelligent being.
Well, that sounds like fascism with extra steps. So, speaking of sin.
Right, so desiderium. It's a type of sin in Catholic thought.
Which is an action of an intelligent being lacking the form, order, or due measure of right reason or eternal law.
Yeah, that about sums it up.
Is that a Latin joke?
Yeah.
Boo. Just boo. What is right reason anyways?
Well, this isn't a Christianity podcast.
Dang, could have fooled me. We've talked more about Christian philosophy and history since we started this podcast than I ever thought I would.
Yeah.
No, just so taste. I mean, desiderium is a type of sin?
Right. It's an internal sin.
Oh, okay. That was easy.
Well, there's 3 types of internal sin.
Oh my God.
That's what Aquinas said. Okay. Desiderium is a type of internal sin, and it is the desire for what is sinful, whereas delicatia morosa is pleasure through sinful thought, and gaudium is being complacent about past sin.
Oh, okay. So Illtud had a warlike taste, which is a desire for the sin of war.
Well, the violence of war, being hostile, belligerent.
So you think the translation should be like desire for hostility? That doesn't make sense.
I didn't say it made sense.
Okay. Let's zoom out now. Taste is queer because of its multiplicity with fixed factors and variable manifestations, which is all of what makes up the fusion of horizons. And the problematic translation only increases that.
Right. And that's why it scores a 3 on the queer authenticity scale.
A 3? That's the queerest thing yet.
Yep, and that's why it took 6 pages of the script to flesh it all out.
Flesh. So what's next?
It's the last queer utterance for this episode because these entries were so short in the White Anthology. But it's on page 18. Now it's that next hagiography, The Life of St. Padarn. And it says, "The earth opened and swallowed up Arthur."
We talked about the earth a few episodes ago, how skyscrapers were masculine and digging the raw materials out of the earth is the feminine. Is that why this is queer?
Yeah, the earth opening up and swallowing him. It sounds really sexual to me.
Okay, but it's not really in there. Unlike the warlike taste being right there in the text, the idea of a whole swallowing up a man, while potentially sexual, yeah, I'll give you that. It isn't there in the text.
Right, there's nothing there that can really affirm this variable interpretation.
While the mythological aspect is really what comes through.
Yeah.
And that's rather ordinary, not queer. Mythology is common. I mean, there's queerness in mythology, but this isn't one of those cases.
Yeah, it would require a more heavy-handed analysis to say that this utterance is queer.
And unlike the skyscrapers being masculine and digging up raw materials as feminine, which is the act of people, this mythological opening up of the earth is an act of God. Plus, it specifically says later, the earth threw him back up. So it's not a feminine, yonic earth, but a hungry, consuming earth.
A bulimic earth.
Oof. Well, all that makes it not queer.
Is God not queer?
What would Aquinas say?
So you're deferring to the proto-Christian fascists?
No, just I don't feel qualified to speak about the identity of God. But a bulimic earth, it's not really queer. Bulimia is like the product of capitalism and advertising, forcing idealized images onto people who then feel ashamed about their bodies.
Is that neurodivergent?
No, bulimia is an eating disorder, not a... Well, it is in the mental health field.
No, you're right. I think you're right. Neurodivergence is more about neurodevelopmental disorders like autism spectrum and personality disorders like obsessive compulsiveness, not really eating disorders like bulimia. You're right. Those are more like these outcomes of societal expectations.
Right, yeah. But now zooming out, the femininity of the earth may be valid and using the feminine as a punishment for Arthur who did bad things in this story?
Yeah, this is one of those stories where Arthur is the villain and the saint is the hero.
But the point is that it's more about the mythological working of the proto-fascist Christian God concept. And that's why it scores 8.
Ooh. God concept. I like that.
And that's why it scores a -1 on the queer authenticity scale.
So for our announcements, I want to hype up a partnership that we're going to be forming with a travel agency. We'll be working with them a little bit to try to plan out this really fun group trip that if we can get enough people to go on, then we'll be able to make it financially feasible. So make sure to follow us on social media if you're interested in going on a group trip to Wales and seeing all sorts of cool historical places.
And to get even more about our Queering Arthur podcast, you can join us on Patreon, and at the $5 level...
It's $3.
Oh, at the $3 level even, you can be a knight of our virtual roundtable and join us on our Discord and get all kinds of goodies. And you can also follow us on our other social media, which you can find links to on our website. But specifically, it would help us a lot if you would follow us on YouTube, which is Queering Arthur Podcast. I do believe if you just search Queering Arthur, you'll find it.
We want to express our thanks to Andrew Chard, who has provided us with this amazing audio recording equipment. Thank you, Andrew.
We would love to extend our thanks to our friends and family, our patrons on Patreon, and all of our listeners for all of your support.
And we'd like to acknowledge that this podcast was recorded on the land of the Nisqually tribe and the Squaxin Island tribe, land that was ceded to the U.S. government under duress during the Treaty of Medicine Creek in the Puget Sound War. Now that you know a little bit about desideria militare, or the lack of right reason manifesting as a desire for hostility, which was in the Illtud hagiography, is the concept of sin still valid? For example, in terms of racism and queerphobia, where these things are desire for the sin of superiority, or perhaps there's a better word to encapsulate these ideas. Whereas sin is a loaded term with a history of thought control and shame. What do you think? Stay chivalrous, Queerthers.